Yeah. Okay. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. And I'm here to talk to Andrew Haines again. A couple of years ago, I think, different role.
I think it was last year, actually. It might have been.
Gosh. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are again. So.
Is this your third Rail Live then?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So.
It's my sixth.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're now with the DFTO.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Okay. So I've got some of the right questions, I hope, in that case. Okay, so I'm going to start by asking about this GBR operating model that's been published, and just to try and understand, just a bit of clarity on what some of that means and how it will look. So we've got the business units at that level, and then above that we've got the divisions, and then the national network level. So the business units would be what, like one of today's sort of size of one of today's TOCs or something?
One of the integrated units. So if you think about SWR or South Eastern and West Midlands trains,
combining obviously the track and train, but
so an integrated,
right. Okay.
Absolutely, those.
Okay, so the sort of typical number of employees for one of those.
Well, I suppose it can range probably from a couple of thousand to maybe the very biggest, probably 6 or 7, maybe 8,000.
Right. Okay.
Some of them are going to be quite chunky businesses.
Right. Okay.
I mean, I think GBR will have somewhere between 90 and 95,000 employees, so it gives you some sense.
Right. Okay. So and then above that you've got the divisions, which brings together a number of those, does it?
Yeah. I mean, before we go any further with this, I think it's really important. All we're doing is creating a model that allows GBR to stand up.
Yeah.
I and a number of other colleagues have said we should not put the industry through a huge amount of restructure and reorganisation when none of us are the future leaders of GBR. We should create as smooth a transition to GBR as we can and accept that the chair, the chief executive, the leadership of GBR will then decide the end state. Okay, so only think of this as the interim to get it stood up.
As it were.
Absolutely.
Okay, and it's not the end game.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Well, it may be, but I very much doubt it because I imagine they'll have their own ideas, their own thoughts. And also because there's some things we would like to do that you simply can't do organisationally in time for stand-up anyway.
And where did this model come from? Are you looking back into the history of where it's done before, or did it come from overseas, another railway, or did it come from another sector, or is there a model for it, or is it a combination of, perhaps?
I think it's partly just, if you look at any business of the scale of GBR, what you want to do is create as much accountability and autonomy in a unit that you can get your arms around, and there is a logic to the sort of 12 or 13 business units because that maps reasonably well to existing activities.
Okay.
But then what you'll never find in a very large organisation like that is those people then directly reporting to a chief executive because it's just too big a span of control. But also, I've been really a strong advocate of maintaining that divisional level in the short term for 2 or 3 reasons. First of all, as I said, it's easier to do.
Right.
Secondly, it allows us to take a bit more risk with those business units because GBR is going to be responsible for, double-digit billion pounds of public money, double-digit billion pounds of passenger revenue, significant third-party operators. And so the government, as are acting on behalf of the shareholders, the taxpayers, are going to want some assurance. So that intermediate level, I think, is essential in the initial phase. Now, 2 or 3 years down the line, people might say there's maturity, maybe you bring some of them together, and you might not need that. But I think for the first few years, if you don't have that intermediate level, you have enormous fragility. Right. If I'm really honest, you end up appointing almost entirely Network Rail people to those jobs then because the infrastructure risk is so great, you squeeze out all the other ability.
Okay, all right. And then then you've got to fit in the devolved authorities into this.
Exactly.
I'm not quite sure how that's going to...
Well, that's messy in the north, isn't it? Because we don't really have anything in the north at the moment. And we're doing a piece of work on looking at what the options for how you might structure the railway in the north will be. But that can't be achieved by day one. So what we're saying is, let's have work that's done so that when the new chair and chief executive are here, they can take some views on that in consultation with those key partners in the north. So let's do that in an inclusive way, but let's not pretend we can tie the hands of the future leadership.
Yeah, okay. And intercity, is that going to have its own?
Well, intercity there's real value, I think, in having some consistency of brand. But the truth of the matter is that the way the railway has expanded in patronage since the dying days of British Rail means that there's much more overlap of what were previously sectors. You know, if you look at the utilisation of the East Coast Main Line, where actually the predominant operator on the East Coast Main Line is GTR, you know, for example, you don't have that sort of purity of geographic and market segmentation that you had in BR. But what you can do is have common marketing. You can have some common standards so that you can market an intercity product, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have to be structured in that way.
Okay, all right. And they're called...
You don't sound very persuaded about that.
No, that's
okay, all right. Okay.
They're called business
Hard man to
units.
please. Yeah.
They're called business units, and do they...
Well, no, I think that's just a Holden phrase again.
Okay. Are you expecting them to compete? Who will they be competing against? Are they going to be in any way competing with each other for extra for new passenger traffic?
Well,
or with other...
There won't be a huge amount of overlap. There's obviously there's cross-country doesn't fit in naturally as a geography. So there will be on some routes open access, and there will undoubtedly be real competition there, and that's why there remains a role, you know, for a regulator on appeal rights around that. But it's mostly competing, actually, with people deciding not to use the railway. That is the biggest opportunity for the railway, is not to take people actually from other modes of transport. Well, not from other modes of public transport.
Yeah.
It's actually persuading people...
Cars, right.
to get out of their cars,
right.
or to make journeys that are discretionary. There's been a session on accessibility, hasn't there? It's just finished. You know, a large number of people with accessibility requirements make fewer journeys because they're worried about the product they get. That's where the potential is, I think, rather than competing with other modes in most cases. There are some places we compete. You know, East Coast with, with aviation is a good example.
And finally on that thing, so in terms of the branding that people will see, eventually it will all be GBR.
Yep.
For too long, we hope. Although I'm told that they'll probably be repainted and things as they need repainting.
Yeah, I don't think...
having a big bang one day, they're all like, there we go, GBR.
I think spending huge amounts of money and taking rolling stock out of service to paint them and do nothing else would be a travesty.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but in time they'll all be GBR, but they'll have some of these subsidiary business unit or division names on them, I suppose.
Again, that'll be a decision the future leadership will take. I think where there's brand value, if you like, where people identify with some of those, then I think we should be pragmatic.
Okay.
But I think we could, you know, in other places, let's be honest, the brand is discredited.
Yeah,
Why would we stick with a discredited brand?
Okay.
You know?
They won't all necessarily completely disappear.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Now, the DFTO here, I interviewed Jeremy Westlake recently, and he said of you, Andrew Haines was a fabulous system-level thinker. Oh. You know, Andrew's ability to see how the system dynamics were holding us back and how GBR is the way to get the railway to perform for its customers and the people it serves. Right? So, what have you seen? Have you discovered anything? So, you're saying you got a great insight as to what was going on.
Very kind.
There, yeah. I wondered if there's any new insights you've got since you went to DFTO in terms of the system dynamics of what's holding things back. And I wonder how you feel it's going on, culture change and things, and I think breaking down silos generally.
I think if I'm really honest, I think the biggest insight I've gained in my time back at DFTO is the extent to which the post-COVID hiatus has knocked the stuffing out of leaders. People whose horizons have narrowed in to managing national rail concession incentives. That's not criticism of those contracts, not even a criticism of those individuals. It was a necessary transition. But almost like winning for people has been getting the best score out of an NRC. And that is a very, very short-term mentality. In some cases, it's meant we've done the wrong long-term decisions. And it's also now, we've got a culture of we wait for approval. And I think we absolutely have to break out of that. You know, it was necessary to have unbelievably tight control of costs in the immediate post-COVID era. The financial situation of the railway at the moment is not exactly fabulous because of the fiscal pressures in the rest of the country and an economy that's not growing as was expected. But we have got to start unlocking people's creativity and freedom to act. And I think that's been the biggest surprise to me. People who I know to be passionate, commercial, can-do, agile are actually holding back. And so a lot of the behaviours historically associated with Network Rail, I think we've almost replicated to a certain extent in train operators, and that we've really, really got to break through. That's my big insight in the last few months.
How is that going to be achieved?
Well, I think first of all, you don't have those contracts in place. You have a P&L accountability. Secondly, by setting some challenging targets. But thirdly, giving people the tools so they can make some of those decisions for themselves.
Okay, all right, okay.
But it's going to be this, for me, culturally, I think that's going to be the single biggest thing we've now got to lean into.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have been like that 7 or 8 years ago. It's a reset. It's a post-COVID reset that we've been delaying because of the time it's taken to get rail reform through.
Right, okay, all right.
Look, other people may disagree with that, but it struck me quite significantly.
So now we're about, 80% of the way through the nationalisation, the public...
Through the public ownership programme. It depends how you measure it, but we've got Chiltern and GWR coming in to define timescales already this year, and then there are 3 then to do, next year.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you the question that every BBC reporter asks me whenever I appear on the thing, which is what real differences will passengers notice from these newly nationalised services, and when?
Well, the act of nationalisation of itself doesn't achieve anything other than ownership transfer and maybe some adjustment to fees. What creates the difference are people starting to work together in track and train and saying, what's the right way to drive passenger satisfaction, passenger growth, freight growth, as opposed to what's the best way to optimize my contract, be that my track access contract, my contract with DFT. And where we are seeing the benefits is where people are beginning to lean into that, and I could talk forever about that. Do you want me to give you some examples?
Yes. Solid things.
Yes, solid things where we are significantly reducing passenger disruption with engineering access by having much more consolidated access on parts of Southeastern. And the Charing Cross blockade is a good example of that, where there are good alternative means of travel, dealing with that much more intensively.
So that's a performance thing. Yeah.
Well, no, that's a passenger experience. That's a passenger experience thing.
Yeah.
Actually, what they're going to get, they'll get less disruption.
Okay, so better performance as far as they can.
Better accessibility of the train service like that. We're having to lean into I was with the SWR yesterday, and and given the geology of the Salisbury to Exeter line, there's a high risk given the current, relatively dry weather, that we'll have more issues there with soil moisture desiccation. But what we're now able to do by working together is plan that much better so that the delays to Exeter journeys, if we have to do it, they'll be half of what they were last year. A very, very significant reduction. It doesn't make the problem of geology go away. It doesn't make the rain come. But what it means is we can be much better prepared to handle the passenger impact of that. We've got lots of opportunities to save cost, which ultimately flow through to the affordability of the system. We've got lots of examples where cancellations are coming down because people are planning integrated train planning teams are already planning a more resilient timetable, and we're better matching resources to that. Okay. I was learning just this week about the fact that the Access for All scheme of Hither Green is going to be finished 5 months early, because guess what? The access that was given to Network Rail to do that scheme when there were 2 separate entities was far more restrictive than it is now that now with the Steve Wrights in both of those camps.
Right.
Because Steve can now see the dividend of actually giving greater engineering access. That means passengers getting that benefit earlier. 5 months earlier will mean cheaper in terms of prolongation costs. There are hundreds of examples. Now, not everybody will notice them every day.
People notice them? I mean, do other
Many they won't, but I think what we are seeing is good customer satisfaction scores generally, and we're seeing general increase of that. And Transport Focus have announced some figures today, and I think I'm not really worried about people being able to point to every individual thing.
Yeah.
Do they think the railway's a bit more on their side? Is it getting a little bit easier? Is it getting a little bit less disrupted? When it's disrupted, are people looking after them a bit better? Okay. Transport can always be disrupted by events, our own failures, our own failure to learn. But what we can do is demonstrate to people that when those things happen, we're just getting a little bit better at how we manage them.
Yeah. Okay. Now you mentioned the savings from doing this, and that the passengers will benefit from those savings. When will they see that in their fares?
Well, look, fares policy will always be a matter for the government because the railway is dependent upon double-digit billion pounds of subsidy. So how much the government wants the burden of the cost of the railway to be covered by the passenger and how much by the taxpayer will always be a political decision and is in every country. What the railway has to do is demonstrate that we can deliver more for less, and then we make that choice easier for government.
Yeah, so they won't necessarily see it at all if the government decides to keep the savings.
Whether they see it or not will be a political decision.
Right.
Will rightly be a political decision because it's government who are best placed to say, given total fiscal budget for the country, how much of it goes into railways. Right. But the railway mustn't be fatalistic. Pino and I were talking about this morning. What we can do is say, where do we deliver more efficiency? So that's a genuine choice. I mean, we've seen this year with the fares freeze that the government sees the political dividend of keeping fares down. We've got to make it easier for them to continue to lean into that and give them that choice. All the time that the cost of the railway is going up, the likelihood of fares coming down is surely axiomatically lower. As we make the choice harder for politicians.
Yeah. And these savings that you say have already started in some places, right? So, and you expect to kind of replicate similar savings as you take TOCs in?
I mean, very much so. Well, as we work more integrated with Network Rail, I've had the privilege in my career of, I've had about, in my sort of 30 years of railways spread over 40 years, I did 10 years in a joined-up British Rail, 10 years of infrastructure and 10 years of train operations. Right. And I've seen the inefficiency that's driven in the system through contractualization.
Yeah. Okay. Are you able to kind of categorize where these savings are? Are they in like
there's a very detailed
duplicate functions of TOCs or getting or things that you improve between the track and track? I mean, I don't know.
The big chunks effectively fall into inefficient engineering access, which means then we increase the cost of maintaining the railway, so we do that inefficiently. Secondly, lost revenue because of not leaning into opportunities to grow market, increase speed restrictions, because under the current rules, Network Rail takes the pain of that but doesn't get any financial reward, so they're not incentivized to do that. Thirdly, then, is the ossification of contracts, which basically means the time it takes you to change things is that much greater. So you've got the prolongation costs of projects. And the Hither Green example is a good example of that. When you give somebody a single P&L, guess what? They do it more quickly because they internalize the trade-offs. And the fourth one then is duplication and the friction costs. Yeah. So it's fourth and fifth. Fourth is duplication. The fifth, I think the friction cost is bigger than the duplication. It's the people who are doing jobs that don't need to exist, because actually in an integrated railway you don't have to do that. Now the great thing about the railway is it's growing. It's growing massively. HS2, East West Rail, TRU. So those people can be redeployed to doing revenue generative, more productive activity. Right.
I mean, that was sort of leads to my next question: was what proportions, how much savings do you think you can make through, a smaller, one big
Well,
operator.
back in 2021, the
numbers of people. You know.
back in 2021, the estimate was that within 5 years you'd be saving £1.5 billion a year. That's that was the estimate that was done then. I have not seen that number refocused recently.
Okay.
That gives you the scale of potential opportunity.
But that's across all kinds of savings, right?
That's the integration opportunity
Yeah.
that comes from GBR. That was in the sort of provisional business case, and I think that number's in the public domain.
Any idea what sort of headcount we might end up with GBR?
I think headcount will not change that much, because actually, if you look at the 7-point plan for drivers, it's saying we need more train drivers.
Yeah, okay.
Actually.
So you're confident they'll all be redeployed elsewhere, those who...
Well, not everybody. What I say to people is, if you are flexible and you're committed to the railway, I genuinely, look me in the whites of my eyes, think there is there's an interesting career prospect for you.
Yeah.
If you want to do exactly the same job you're doing today, then you're going to be in for a nasty shock in many jobs.
But it'll come from growth opportunities.
It'll come from growth, and it'll come from delivering the government's agenda in a way that's more efficient. And you look at everybody at the moment is talking about the capital cost of HS2, but the ability for that to, when it runs through the network, if we really fundamentally address the rest of the timetable, that has got to be transformative. Transpennine route upgrade, East-West Rail, all three of those big capital investment programs require the rest of the network to respond to them. They can't just be plonked down and run in isolation. They're all utterly dependent upon GBR adapting, and it's that sort of thing that GBR can do in a way that the existing structure simply doesn't enable.
Okay. All right. Okay, enough of me. Questions from the audience? Yeah, gentleman over there.
Hello, Major Nick Stacey from Ministry of Defence. I understand that freight operating companies won't be included in GBR. And I was just wondering the reasons behind that and whether that would potentially change in the future. Thank you.
Well, the fundamental reason is that the government's chosen to nationalise public operators, and there's no intention, I think, by any political party to nationalise the freight operators. They regard, I think, there being a legitimate private market for freight. So freight operators will be critical customers of GBR. And one of the things that the legislation that's going through Parliament does is actually give us a statutory growth target for GBR to be incentivised and obligated to do what it can to grow freight traffic. And I think, look, we've seen diversity. And back in 20 years ago now, I was the chairman of GB Rail Freight, and it was, I think, a £10 million turnover business. I don't know what the latest turnover is, but I think last time I looked, it was north of 300 million. So that, we've seen agile response in the freight sector. Government doesn't want to do anything to stop that. What GBR's got to do is contract with it in a way that facilitates it. Yeah.
Okay, all right. One more there. Good.
Andrew, Steve Holmes here from Comet. Of course, this week at Rail Live, there are lots of suppliers here. And of course, I'm sure a lot of them are interested in how the relationship with the supply chain will change with the advent of GBR. Love to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah. Well, if we take the sort of artificial split between rolling stock and infrastructure supply chain, if you like, one of the first things that GBR, pre-GBR, we're going to be doing is, launching a rolling stock strategy. When I was here 2 years ago, you could barely move for arterios, that had been parked up here for a good number of years, and now we're surrounded by midlife class 350s. We have, there is massive opportunity to do better on rolling stock strategy and have long-term relationships with the rolling stock supply chain that has benefited passengers, but also to taxpayers, and what I hear is to supply chain as well. So that's one example of where a very clear long-term strategy, I think, can be foundational, not just to the big tier one sort of global manufacturers, but to the supply chain.
Are you looking for more standardisation in the things that we're procuring? I mean, fewer
what everybody
types, but not just that, not just rolling stock. Across
yeah, well, look, what everybody's
well, I'm hearing it quite a lot at the moment. Is standardisation allows us to innovate better, and it allows us to save money and a whole bunch of things.
When I talk to rolling stock manufacturers and supply chain, they say, look, every time you modify, we have we have design costs, we have product approval costs, we have build costs, and it's not obvious to us that anybody factors those in.
Right.
To the real value for money test. So we're not talking about standardising. One colour train, one.
But fewer types, perhaps.
Fewer in a core infrastructure platform.
Yeah.
Lord Hendy himself is rightly, I think, very passionate about accessibility.
Yeah.
Being much clear about an expectation of unassisted boarding as the norm, not always possible everywhere, but as a baseline, that's something we're aspiring to. Look at. In the when it comes to the infrastructure supply chain, I think we've got to be very, very clear that the majority of railway spend will still be in the private sector post GBR, and there is no desire or appetite to do that. There is a level of creativity and agility and responsiveness when the supply chain works at its best that GBR will be utterly dependent upon, and I've met 3 or 4 people today who give me good examples of that. Where we've not done it well is we've created complexity, haven't we? We spent, with SWR yesterday and with the infrastructure people there are 15 types of track circuit between Waterloo and Woking. Does anybody think that's a reliable, efficient way to deliver services on one of the most congested parts of the network? It's not, is it? Now, it's not easy to transform that overnight, but being much more disciplined in that activity is a good example of where we need to lean in and give it a much longer much longer visibility of what those asset intentions are.
Okay. All right. Spot for choice now. This lady here, I think. Yeah. No.
Hi, hello, my name's Lucy Pryor from Octavius. Andrew, thank you for today. It's quite a loosely worded question on purpose. I chaired a session yesterday on the dichotomy, if you like, between GBR renationalisation and devolution. Mm-hmm. And we have the IBUs and we have the integration with GBR into the mayoral combined authorities. How would you best like to see that relationship play out between the business units and the devolved authorities? So, politely, I fundamentally reject the notion of the dichotomy. I think if you were to talk to, let's just say, Andy Burnham, as a mayor, as a mayor, he would say the railway today frustrates the hell out of him because he's got nobody that he can talk to. And actually, being able to speak with one voice. Or Tracy Brabin, in the other side of the country, or Kim McGuinness, these people, Richard Parker in the West Midlands, they find immense frustration that if they want to run an additional train service at the moment, they've got to talk to multiple players, heavy involvement with the Department for Transport, heavy involvement with train operators, heavy involvement with Network Rail, and they can't go to that single point of contact. So I think GBR creates a real opportunity to present the face of the railway with those people who are real partners. Does that mean over time, as they gain more powers, GBR might want to reconfigure how it runs itself?
Right.
My answer would be, I hope so, because we should lean into that. I think devolution, generally speaking, if you look at where there's been real devolved administration, I think the railways have tended to flourish. Because you've got the economic decisions are being taken locally, and there tends to be much more recognition of the value, of social and economic benefit of the railways. So I would hope that we would lean into that. But I think as a fundamental, it's an opportunity rather than a problem. And again, Vernon Everett, as the Transport Commissioner for Greater Manchester, absolutely recognises that Manchester's commuters are served by trains from Wales, from Norwich, in some cases from Scotland, and therefore the network working well is really critical.
to Manchester working well as a city. So they're not against the idea of a network, but what they are for is being able to have a real relationship with people they can hold to account for delivering.
Okay, thanks. I promised I'd get you out on time.
Yeah.
So we are unfortunately out of time, but I'm sorry I couldn't take those last questions. But thank you. Thanks for coming, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.